Welcome once again to the ACA podcast, made possible by Williamsville Wellness. I'm Billy Hoffman.
I'm Stephen Smith.
And we talk ACA, which is adult children of alcoholics and dysfunction. In the ACA program, Stephen, there's, just a review, there's a laundry list. And there are 14 traits that the author who wrote them originally saw in groups that he started to see some of the same things popping up, right? And so he decided, let's make a list out of all of these things. And basically they're traits that a person that grows up in, whether it's alcoholism, any kind of addiction or dysfunction, some of these traits, people are likely to have them.
Yes. Yeah, they're going to show up mostly in adulthood. And the laundry list kind of has a look at and talks about how things we experienced in the childhood is going to impact or, connect to what we're now doing in adulthood. And so we've been doing a series, kind of working our way through these 14 traits. Each trait's going to have a laundry list side and an other laundry list side. If you want to hear more about the earlier traits, we've got earlier videos and podcasts out on that already. Today, we're talking about traits 5 and 6. If you are interested in this or want to follow along at home, you can go to adultchildren.org as the official ACA website, and they just have a pretty easy to find link where you can find the laundry list if you want to read.
So we've had traits 1 and 2. We did that. We did traits 3 and 4.
Yes.
So that was 2 videos. And in today's podcast, we're looking at 5 and 6. So
yes.
What is 5 all about?
Sure. So why don't we start? So trait 5, starting with the laundry list side, says we live life from the viewpoint of victims and we are attracted by that weakness in our love and friendship relationships. So the laundry list side here, for people who listened to the previous podcast where you left off on trait 4, 5, I think, connects a lot to similar things in trait 4. This talks a lot about, I think, the relational component of dysfunction and how it impacts people. So starting with living a life from the viewpoint of victims, I think for some people might hear that or read that, and that can make them sort of, hesitate a second. Like, I don't think of myself as a victim. What does that even really mean? What I think this really is talking about is growing up in a household where, there was a lot of dysfunction, addiction, trauma, any of the above. People who are on the receiving end of that or see or witness that a lot, it can kind of become a part of someone's identity in the sense of, I guess this is just kind of what my life is like. I guess this is just sort of what tends to happen to me.
So we resign to this.
Yeah, there can be like a kind of passivity to someone's response to it. And again, this isn't necessarily something that is that person's fault, especially if this is, being developed over the course of what they're experiencing in childhood. Kids are not going to feel like they have a strong sense of agency or ability to get out. If that's the life that then that's going to be kind of what you begin to see yourself as.
And I would just add to the dysfunction part, that would certainly go for someone who grew up with a narcissistic parent or parents.
Yeah, definitely.
It's very hard to feel like you have a voice when your parents are suck up all the air in the room all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And so the second piece of this is we are attracted by that weakness in our love and friendship relationships. And again, I think some people can be kind of put off by the phrase weakness. I don't love that phrasing because I think sometimes people could interpret that, as like it's a character fault. I'm too weak. But really, I think what this is referring to is a tendency of people who grew up in homes such as, the ones we're describing here, to be drawn towards, both in terms of friendships as well as attracted to, often in romantic contexts, other people who grew up with dysfunctional backgrounds.
Right. And I told you in previous podcasts, that was me, you've had all these problems. I've had all these problems and we get each other, we're soulmates.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that there's a pretty natural extent to which people tend to gravitate towards other people who are, similar to them in some ways. We talked about in the last podcast that term, trauma bonding, and I think that again kind of applies here. So when people experience a lot of dysfunction, trauma in their life, that becomes the sort of sole basis of like, this person gets it. They're not going to judge me. Maybe they might have that sense of like, they're on the same level as me. Whereas maybe if I'm trying to get with someone who didn't grow up with dysfunction in their household, maybe a part of me feels like, oh, I'm less than them, and that makes me feel very uncomfortable.
Or I feel like I'm constantly being, taught by that person or criticized. Sure. Of course, because certainly if my self-esteem is low and I'm in this place with this trait, then even being taught is going to feel like criticism for many.
Definitely. It's also just like, when there's like almost like someone's teaching you something in a relationship, there's like a dynamic there that doesn't always feel the most like attractive in a romantic context. It's like a parent-child relationship.
It happens a lot. It does. Yeah, it does happen a lot. Yeah.
And then the last thing I think I'd add on this too is the sort of rescuing component. So sometimes if I grew up in a dysfunctional household, I may have, been sort of the surrogate caretaker for the family, which I think is what we're going to explicitly talk about at trait 6 in a little bit. So I may be drawn to other people who have dysfunctional backgrounds because there's a part of me that feels, compelled to fix, to rescue, because that's a way that makes me feel like I have a sense of agency, a sense of purpose, and makes me perhaps feel like less of a victim, less helpless, less powerless in this all if I'm able to rescue, help fix others. So I think that dynamic can kind of be at play for people who might relate to trait 5 as well.
And the thing that I didn't realize in my personal experience was that a lot of the rescuing part, I didn't realize this, but I was rescuing myself, basically, because I could relate to what was going on. It was like I was fixing myself at the same time.
Yeah. Whereas like if you didn't do that, if you didn't have a project or someone else to rescue or fix, like how would you be feeling about yourself usually?
Yeah, just flat. Flat. Not, no sense of validation, being unable to give that to myself.
Sure.
Or see my own worth.
Yeah. And again, I think we actually have to cover the other laundry list side first. But, once we get into these middle row of traits, this is where I think people who, participate in ACA groups start to see that, different traits kind of touch up against each other, connect, and flow into one each other pretty well. But speaking of the other laundry list side, the other laundry list for trait 5 is that we live life from the standpoint of a victimizer, and we are attracted to people that we can manipulate and control in our important relationships. So, earlier you said that like on the laundry list side, if you grew up in a household where there may have been a kind of grandiose or narcissistic caretaker, someone who, their needs were always center stage, it always became about them. I think that this, like I've talked about in previous podcasts, the other laundry list side here speaks to what I may have learned by just seeing that kind of behavior displayed by an adult. So I may have been a victim of that, right? My needs may have been neglected. I may have been belittled. I may have had to take care of their needs. But I also was watching an adult that was modeling that. And I may have just sort of absorbed some of that as like, that's how adults can behave sometimes.
So if I need to manipulate people to get my way, if I need to make people feel guilty to get my way, that's what happens.
Yeah. It is essentially we are watching a person, an adult who's not really taking accountability healthily for their actions. We are watching them try to get their needs met in a kind of unhealthy or aggressive way. It's saying I'm going to get my needs met at all costs, whether it's going to manipulate, I'm going to put others down. And so, in adulthood, let's say I have these like relationships. A lot of times this stuff comes out in the close or romantic relationships. I may feel at times lonely, like no one cares about me, and like I have low self-esteem. And what I want is someone to care about me so that I don't have to feel that way. And the other laundry list side speaks to the pattern of basically I want those needs met, which are valid needs, but I'm going to get them met by manipulating you, by coercion, by,
Yeah, or manipulating multiple people.
playing people.
He's all play that's a big one. I could tell you, I grew up with some of my caretakers that would do that. They would play people against each other so that they could create this dynamic where they're the king, swooping in and fixing things, or it's the character assassination.
Yeah,
That's a big one.
make someone else kind of look worse, so that then, by comparison, maybe I look better,
Right.
Something like that. Yeah, I mean, there's not really any other way to say it. I think that like that kind of thought process, that kind of style, I'm going to get my needs met basically at the cost of whatever it takes to other people around me, is kind of the language of like abuse, of like emotional abuse. And the need is a valid one. Someone has low self-esteem, they want their needs met, but they're doing it in this way that is actively disregarding or harming other people.
Yes.
And if we grew up with a caretaker who did that, we may have absorbed or internalized some of that, even if we were the target of it. So this is a lot of times when we talk about with the other laundry list side, I think is harder for other people, or for people to really like reckon with. I think it takes some hard work sorting through how we relate to the laundry list, for us to have some self-honesty and say, you know what, maybe I don't do this all the time, but if I grew up with a caretaker who did that, there may be a little of that in me, and that's something that I have to be aware of and kind of manage, even if I don't necessarily do it all the time, like my dad or
And from a recovery perspective, I would say not only do I have to see those little parts, but those are things that need to go in my inventory. So that then I can work towards not going back to there.
Yeah, and doing that regular process of reflection is pretty key, I think, with all of this stuff. So why don't we go to trait 6 then?
Okay. Trait 6, we have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, and it is easier for us to be concerned with others rather than ourselves. This enables us not to look too closely at our own faults, etc.
Yes,
It says.
it's a big etc. It is. Really fees that belong to the side of trait 6.
Yeah, it is. And now I will tell you, we were talking about this before the podcast, but often in an ACA group that we run, people are less likely to warm up to trait 5 because sounding like I'm a victim, and I don't like hearing that. But when it comes to saying that I have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, this trait doesn't make me look or feel so bad, because I feel like, that's right, I take responsibility and I help others.
Sure.
But that's a dangerous thing to do. And why is that?
Yeah. So I think you're spot on. Trait 6 is kind of like saying, I just do too much of a good thing. And helping people is generally seen in our society as that's a good thing. And I would agree with that. But what's challenging about trait 6 is that when we frame it that way, if I do too much of a good thing, it overlooks, I'd say, first of all, where that pattern is coming from. And it's also not really acknowledging the ways that behavior kind of benefits us. So to break that down, maybe we can talk about examples of this. So an overdeveloped sense of responsibility. People who relate to trait 6, along this line, usually are people who will say that they spend most of, if not all, their time generally thinking about other people first. What do they need? How are my actions going to make them feel? I might be quick to do things for other people. If I'm a parent and one of my kids has stuff going on, I'm always going to jump to do it for them.
I fix it before they even need it to be fixed.
Exactly, yeah. And might even pride themselves in being someone who can kind of anticipate other people's needs. And again, right, that all sounds kind of good. The downsides of that are that, one, when you spend all of your time doing that, it's stressful, it can be exhausting, and often comes at the expense of a lack of time for paying attention to what I need. And now I don't just mean that in the sense of like, oh, I don't give myself any time for self-care. Yes, that probably happens. But I mean, I don't even ever think about what goes on inside of me. I don't pay attention to my emotions. I don't pay attention to my desires, my opinions on things. I might not even have a strong sense of what I like and dislike. In a sense, my identity is consumed by what I think other people want from me or what I can do for other people. And yes, that comes out of neglect for self, but often this is reinforced, those behaviors, by the fact that if I do that, people usually will see me as a really good friend, a really loving and caring parent. Wow, he would give anyone the shirt off his back. What a great person. Mm-hmm. It gives me a source of gratitude.
Yeah, there's a payoff.
Yeah. And like, I don't mean people hearing this to think that it's bad for anyone to ever praise us, right? I think that's okay.
And it's not even bad to help other people. It comes back to if I want to do it, and I have a good sense of self and self-care and balance, then I am going to go help other people when I can. When I can. But if I have a need to feel the payoff, that's the problem with this.
Yeah. Yes. And it also is like, when I say I base my identity off it, it also means that I kind of base in large part my sense of self-worth off of it. Mm-hmm. So what I do or can do for other people kind of defines what I'm worth. It's a very slippery slope. Not just because we're, relying on other people to give us a sense of self-worth. But like, this can lead to essentially a breeding ground for resentment. And what I mean by that, Ad, is like people who engage in trait 6, I'm always doing for others, I'm always doing for others, I'm always doing for others. There may be a part of me that wonders, well, how come no one ever cares about me? And so where this stuff comes from usually is in childhood. This is the child who became sort of the stabilizing force in the household. Sometimes people have heard the term, being a parentified child.
Right.
This might include, I had to look after and take care of my siblings.
The hero.
Yes. And I'd say even the most extreme cases of this, I had to take care of my parent. My parent was out of commission because they're in active addiction and they're passed out in the bedroom. Somebody's got to feed everyone in the household. That was me. Or I had to make sure that, dad didn't harm himself in some way, because then the whole house was going to fall apart. This comes from very extreme and intense scenarios. And so I developed this pattern of taking responsibility for the things that my caretakers were not. But there is a need in me as a kid that says like, this is hard. I don't like doing this. I wish someone would just allow me to be a kid.
I just want to go play.
I just want to go play. Or I want someone to take care of me sometimes. And so in relationships, you have someone who might, always be doing, thinking, fixing, and sometimes can also have that little seed that says, well, how come my partner never thinks about me?
So there's the resentment, and then there's also that other dynamic where when the other person does think about me, and I say, oh no, I'm good, I don't need any help. So that from my view, where I stand today, I see that as that's me not wanting. First of all, there's a control issue, but I also don't want to risk what happens if you don't follow through, like my father, like my mother, all the people I took care of.
Yes.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And again, just like we mentioned in previous podcasts, we're not saying that you consciously,
of course,
think about these things all the time, but the actions, are coming from this that's inside of you.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with the way that like that can kind of fuel the resentment. And there's a lot of fear in there as well. Like you said, like if I allow them to do something for me, I'm kind of risking the opportunity that they don't follow through, or I'm risking that they do it in a way that I don't like, and I have to let go of control, and that can be, in amongst this as well. So for people who are listening, if they, heard Trait 6 or have read it and have thought, oh yeah, no, I relate to that. The reason I want to say think about the payoffs for this is because if you want to change the patterns of Trait 6, you really have to look at this thing that I'm doing, what is it doing for me? What need is it fulfilling for me emotionally? And what's driving that? Because if I can understand the fear or the stuff beneath that, it might allow me to kind of let go of some of the sense of responsibility, start to take care of myself a little bit more instead of just focusing on other people.
For the sake of time, I think we have to read the flip side.
Yes, let's do the other side.
Do you want to do it?
Sure. The other laundry list for Trait 6 is we are irresponsible and self-centered. Our inflated sense of self-worth and self-importance prevents us from seeing our deficiencies and shortcomings. So very much, the exact opposite side of the coin to everything we just talked about. And again, I think this connects a lot to if I grew up in a home where I had a sort of grandiose, narcissistic, self-centered caretaker, and I saw that happen, then that was kind of normalized for me. And I maybe want to take a pause here to give some examples of what I mean by that, because I worry sometimes that, the word narcissistic is, gets thrown around a lot and maybe is in danger of losing meaning. A self-centered, or grandiose person isn't necessarily always going around saying I'm better than everyone. A lot of times that is communicated through action and the dynamics of the household. So did I grow up in a household where there was one parent, for example, where it's almost like everyone's behavior was sort of organized around them? What was their mood? What did they want to do? Did we always do what they wanted to do? Was everyone always walking on eggshells around that person? If it's organized and everything orbits around them, in a way, I still think that's self-centered, even if there's not these overt statements about my dad never said that he thought he was better than everyone. But, if everyone else moves heaven and earth always around his needs, and when he doesn't get his way, there's an outburst or there's anger. I think that would be irresponsible.
He never said it, but he sure acted like it.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
I can tell you 20 years, I would say 20 years. This other laundry list piece, that's what I did, man. I was irresponsible and self-centered. Inflated sense of self-worth and self-importance. And, so I had all of my addiction stuff going on, yet at the same time, I'm on the radio when radio is a big deal, and I'm on billboards, or I'm on this, or what, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like I had this personality and self-centeredness, and all I thought about was me.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I'm addicted, right? Which made it even worse.
Yeah.
My ex-wives, you could see that over time they were just worn out by it.
Yeah, it's tough to bear.
Yeah, they were just worn out by it. Yeah.
I think that and maybe there's some part of this that you can relate to in your personal experience. I'm drawing here on an author who I've mentioned in another podcast, Terry Real, who talks about grandiosity. He's a really excellent writer on the themes of grandiosity, self-centeredness, and he will say there's kind of two types in a way. So there is grandiosity, which basically says is this belief that I'm one up or I'm better than, whether I consciously think that or my behavior says that. And that can come from either grandiosity that covers up actually an underlying sense of low self-esteem.
Oh my goodness, I guess a lot of that. Yeah, a lot of self-worth, low self-esteem.
So on the outside, I behave this way. And it's almost as if grandiosity or self-centeredness is kind of like a drug. He writes that it's kind of a well-kept secret of psychology is that grandiosity feels good because it makes us feel self-assured, powerful. It makes us feel confident. but it's kind of like this false mask, because in my private moments or other times, secretly I may be very insecure, very worried. And so I sort of run to this drug of grandiosity so that I don't have to feel that way about myself. That's one type. And that can come from either I watched a caretaker model that, or because I had such a low sense of self-esteem, I kind of developed this false, boisterous exterior to help me cope with that. So that's type 1. The other type, listeners may remember a few podcasts ago, I asked this question of who saw me do this in childhood and did nothing, or who allowed me to do this. There is another type of grandiosity that Terry Real writes about that says sometimes people, and even just kids, are kind of naturally self-centered. And in the absence of any kind of healthy parenting, where someone, teaches us through healthy means that, hey, there are limits on what you can and can't do, and hey, your actions impact other people, and you should care about that. You should care about how other people think about you, especially if you want to have any kind of relationships with other people. If no one ever taught me that, if no one ever placed limits on that, if I had a parent who just kind of let me do whatever I want, sometimes people could grow and have a sense of grandiosity and self-centeredness that isn't really covering up a sense of self-esteem. They just sort of think, yeah, okay, that's fine.
That's what I do, yeah.
And the way that people change that, I think, is really when they start to get into situations where they realize that, like, most people don't really want to be friends with or be in close relationships with people like that. Mm-hmm. The minute that I decide that I want to enter into a relationship with a person, in order for this to have any kind of working relationship, they need to feel that I care about them and what they think and feel, at least a little bit. And so people who have some of that self-centered grandiosity may find like a distinct lack of close relationships. They may find that relationships have a way of ending, and they feel very lonely at times. I would say people who relate to the other laundry list side of trait 6 often are going to be relating to trait 5 other laundry list. They may be more attracted to people that then they can keep in their life through manipulation, coercion, control, because otherwise people don't want to be around me. So all of this stuff that I'm saying here, many people hear this and say, wow, that sounds like a faraway concept for, I don't know, 0.1% of the population who are, psychopaths and narcissists and whatever we want to label them as.
No, for me, it sounds like the 1970s and the 1980s.
But
Continue.
I encourage folks to really take an honest self-reflection that if I grew up around, or if I could label anyone in my life growing up as, oh, I think they were pretty self-centered or grandiose, or I think they kind of were manipulative, do some work and take a look. Have there ever been times in my life where I have found myself doing a little bit of that? Because a lot of times, if we were around it, we might have really tried to become the opposite. We might have gone the other direction, but sometimes there's just like a little seed of that in us. And it doesn't mean we're a bad person. It doesn't mean we're the same as them. But it might be in there, and you might find that it can get triggered or come out in certain ways. And so to your point about the daily inventory, I think that it is a really good thing to do. It could be a very freeing thing when people actually learn to like, oh yeah, there are times where I can be a little self-centered or put myself before others, and that doesn't make me a bad person, but I gotta know that about myself.
Mm-hmm. I don't know about you folks, but I could listen to Steven talking about this all day long.
That's very kind.
And the good news is you'll get to do it again next week, because we will be back with traits 7 and 8 from the ACA laundry list with Williamsville Wellness.